it yet, but the whole nature of regulation and EPA's authority. The Supreme Court has upheld EPA's discretion and their flexibility in devising solutions to the problems that they see. So it's an interesting time period right now to see where EPA goes next on CSAPR and SO2 and NOx policy, but also the implications of the Supreme Court decision, as I think we all well know, have implications for the 111D policy and supporting EPA's discretion and having flexibility trading programs and going after the CO2 as a pollutant. So it's an interesting time for the industry, and a speech here that I didn't imagine we would have so much uncertainty and interest going into. So I'm happy to provide my views. I apologize if I'm going to provide a groundwork and a framework for the history of SO2 and NOx policy. I'm sure everyone here is very well grounded in it, so please excuse me if I'm a little rudimentary, but I think it's an important context to set in relation to where we are today and where we might be heading forward. So with that, I'll start with the presentation. So history, and I think one of the things, I'll focus on CSAPR and where to the end where I think we are today and where we're heading. But I do want to talk a lot about the uncertainty and the progress we've made, but the challenges that lie ahead. I think that's really, understanding that is really crucial to understanding where we might go in understanding where the future of SO2 and NOx policy may be. So taking a step back, I think it's always important to ground ourselves in why are we regulating this, and I don't need to tell anyone here, but SO2 and NOx have pretty clear links to human health and I guess visibility problems, but that's the scientific foundation. That's the problem that we're all here to solve. And so EPA, in this regard, more so than CO2 arguably, has a pretty firm ground in its need to regulate SO2 and NOx emissions. So the Clean Air Act gives it very very solid authority to do so, and we've been living with that obviously for the last 20 years. So that's the groundwork we're working on, the framework we're working under. Let's see here. Okay, so just to step back, the reason SO2 and NOx policy has so much uncertainty, I think, is because there's a lot of discretion, and it has to do with an ambient air quality standard. We all know achieving a certain concentration of ozone and PM in the atmosphere. So the focus naturally is less on one unit's individual stack emissions and is more about achieving wide ambient air quality standards. So in that, there's inherent flexibility for the use of trading programs, and as well as looking at regional modeling and interstate transport issues. So it's an interesting, rather than mercury and some of the hazardous air pollutants, which have more human health impacts or more severe impacts to health, SO2 and NOx, there's a little bit of flexibility inherent in it, and I think that's an important grounding to understand, and it provides some element of flexibility, but also that flexibility introduces uncertainty into how EPA will ultimately can go about regulating the emissions. So just to step back, after the rain program, I think we're all well aware of that. It was the first emissions trading program, and it, in large degree, provides a framework for the 111D proposal on carbon. It was widely credited for achieving dramatic emissions reductions in a short period of time, cost effectively. And so, love it or hate it, it has brought us to the point now where we're talking about carbon trading systems and even further tighter caps under SO2 and NOx. I'm not going to go into the details of what was, but these slides are here for you to read. The challenge, though, with SO2 and NOx is, of course, transport, interstate transport. It's very complex to understand the direct linkages between sources and receptors and how different units affect air quality among the regions. We can spend a few days looking at EPA's modeling and all of the nuances of the scientific understanding of how NOx and SO2 emissions get dispersed into the atmosphere. But I think it provides an interesting case study in how a regulator would, makes a determination as to an equitable distribution of costs and benefits across a region. Each state has its particular fuel mix and different cost structures with its generation fleet, yet there are regional air problems, and so it's a very interesting but difficult problem to solve as far as A, understanding where the emissions are affecting air quality, and B, how do you distribute those costs and effects, so costs and benefits. And so that's the challenge. We're all living with it, but that's where we are. So in that effect, to realize emissions reductions, to achieve the national ambient air quality standards, EPA has gone through a series of efforts, fits and starts with clean air interstate trading rule CARE, which the Bush administration first proposed. The DC Circuit, as we know, struck it down, then allowed it to remain in place while EPA developed an alternative. The courts determined that it was not stringent enough, so then EPA was back to the drawing board. With that, they developed CASPR, the proposal we all know about. During that time, the allowance prices, which for SO2 today range around $1, they were, for a large part in the early 1990s and 2000, were around $100 to $200. They spiked to $400 to $500 per ton, went up to $1,600 per ton, and then collapsed in response to the Supreme Court ruling striking down CARE and now it's been fairly flat around $1 per ton. So a lot of variability, a lot of money at risk, introduces complexity into long-term investment decision-making when you're banking on credits to make these retrofits. And so same with NOx. The market has been very volatile in response to all these different regulatory proposals and the Supreme Court decisions that have in turn struck down rules and then upheld certain provisions. So I think we're going to continue to see a volatile ride in the markets as the courts and EPA and stakeholders figure out what eventually will be a program that everyone can live with. I do want to point to the achievements that have been made. We see a dramatic reduction in SO2 and NOx emissions over the time period since 1980. Clean Air Act was tasked with achieving reductions, and it largely succeeded. You see here a 67% reduction by 2012, while electricity generation went up. You see population has increased, GDP has increased. So this is a very good success story, and it's a lot of people in the room here and others who have implemented back-end technology to reduce emissions and it's cost-effectively achieve reductions in a way that provided flexibility for some units to choose not to and pay for emissions credits, other units to make retrofits to comply. So I think this is a good success story. I think it's important to note that we've made a lot of achievements. We have a ways to go, but I also want to point your attention to vehicle miles traveled. That's a proxy for transport emissions, emissions from cars, trucks, automobiles, and we've become more mobile, moved out into the suburbs more, and a lot more driving, and that in turn has increased a lot of the problem to ozone pollution. And I'll touch upon that point in the end, but I think it's important to note that that's a problem that's there, and we continue to drive more while our electricity consumption has largely flattened out. And we've achieved a lot of reductions from our existing fleet. We will be achieving more through implementation of MATS, but yet we still have challenges in the transportation sector that contributes still to a lot of the problem for NOx and ozone ambient air quality standards. So with that, this is where we currently stand with regards to. Sorry, a little bit of a delay here. So with regard to ozone, this is where we currently stand. This is attainment with the 2008 standard. You can see non-attainment largely focused in urban metropolitan areas where people live, industry is located, power plants are located, and a lot of people drive. with exception of California, unique to their geography in the Central Valley, they have challenges. This is the 2008 standard, which the CSAPR rule and CARE, which is currently in place, is a more stringent standard than what we're currently complying with and what CSAPR envisioned us to comply with. The CSAPR rule originally intended for us to comply with the 1990 standard that was 84 parts per billion. This is 2008 standard, which is 75 parts per billion. So you see we have some challenges yet to remain, a lot of progress, but still some reductions yet to be realized. Similarly for SO2 and PM 2.5, we have still some areas largely centered around metropolitan regions where population lives and industry and activities occur. So this points to the need for further reductions. And with that, I'll move now into where we are today in the current environment. I appreciate everyone suffering through that long and belabored history. But as we all know, the Supreme Court upheld, or overturned, the D.C. Circuit's vacature of CSAPR, and they upheld EPA's authority and its methodology to establish an interstate trading program, and they remanded the case back to the D.C. Circuit for EPA, or for this circuit to determine how EPA should proceed in their rulemaking. With that, in the meantime, states are complying with CARE, and some states are moving ahead with NOx rack requirements to force certain units, combustion turbines, to install controls or retire in order for them to achieve their air quality goals. New Jersey has done that. Connecticut is leading towards that, as well as New York, and Pennsylvania may be leading that direction, in that direction as well. With the implementation of MATS, largely the country will achieve its SO2 targets under CSAPR. So when EPA first proposed CSAPR, there were reductions envisioned under SO2. But with MATS implementation and the scrubbers or the unit retirements, as well as the dispatch, the different dispatch from the gas price declines from when CSAPR was first proposed, SO2 we look to be in a very good situation. Aside from certain areas where a 1 hour standard will challenge certain facilities, SO2 reductions have or will have been achieved. With NOx, though, it's a different standard, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in the future, but but I just wanted to touch upon that right now. So again, with the Supreme Court decision, the Supreme Court upheld EPA's authority to regulate and their discretion in determining neighboring states or individual states' good neighbor responsibilities to lower their emissions, to help other states achieve their air quality goals. And again, I mentioned before, but this has implications for 111D and the ability for EPA to go along with that plan. And while there will be challenges and a lot of court cases, and Quinn talked a lot about that yesterday, this has emboldened EPA and goes a long way to suggesting that a lot of their plan may be given discretion by the courts. I'll flip through the next two slides. The CSAPR regions are similar to CARE with some extension. Texas and Florida are key focal points, because one thing that the Supreme Court did determine was that the threshold for requiring states to join these interstate transport regions should be not more significant than would bring them into the program. So Texas and Florida, the EPA brought them under the program because their emissions contributed greater than 1% to the problem, but EPA was foreseeing them to have reductions that would bring them greater or reduce them that obligation. And so the Supreme Court said that EPA can't make them achieve reductions that are greater than their contribution. So I think for Texas and Florida specifically, the Casper and the rewrite of a rule, they may not need to comply as stringently as originally thought. So the focus right now, as far as Casper, is of course on a July 3rd briefing date with EPA. The parties, the DC Circuit has asked the parties to the litigation to provide briefs on how they think they should proceed. There were a lot of unanswered provisions or questions as far as challenges to the modeling approaches. Again, whether Texas and Florida should be included into the program that the DC Circuit didn't originally address in their ruling that vacated the rule. And so July 3rd, as I speak here today, there's not a lot of certainty as to what will transpire in the future, but July 3rd will be a key date, and EPA has been close to the vest in indicating where they are thinking on Casper. So it's an open guess as to what could happen. But in the meantime, CARE remains in effect, and there are 2015 reductions scheduled to take effect that will, again, for SO2 be less of a challenge, but for NOx will require some incremental reductions that may force some incremental installations of SCRs or NSCRs. Critical question there is allowance prices and or whether or not states will move to impose a racked requirement on individual units as their method to attain their ambient air quality standards. A lot of questions about what could transpire. EPA could attempt to implement Casper as was previously written as early as January 1st, 2015. Some say maybe beginning May 1st, 2015, coincident with the ozone season, the summer ozone season. However, there are a lot of questions as to whether or not the original Casper rule and the reductions and the targets are relevant today, given the changes in the industry with less coal plants running, higher gas emissions down lower than actually what Casper would have required anyway. So there's a lot of thought that EPA may seek to revise the caps that Casper started. And so they may take a year or so to redo their modeling and assess which states are in and out and what the cap should be. So that could push implementation of a Casper Phase 2 back to 2016. And then there's a thought, too, that EPA may scrap or put Casper on hold as was envisioned, and in lieu of that, look to the 2008 ozone standard, which is more stringent, and repropose a new interstate transport rule, which they had previously announced that they were going to propose by October of this year. And they can basically scrap Casper in lieu of this new tighter rule, which would address the more stringent 2008 standard. And so that could take as much as 2 years to actually implement. So we could be talking implementation by 2015 January or as late as 2017. So a lot of uncertainty as to what course EPA will pursue. A lot of Wall Street analysts are speculating on that, and a lot of plants are in limbo, of course, complying with MATS. But this incremental requirement of an SCR or SNCR is a critical question that they will need to, I guess, hold on and wait until they have an idea as to what EPA is thinking. So with that, with SO2, there was a new 1 hour standard that EPA is working to implement. Again, SO2 reductions that have occurred because of the changes in the industry and dispatch from coal to gas, as well as the controls that will be installed from MATS. SO2 as a overall cap looks to be in good shape. However, there are some local areas in non-attainment that will struggle to meet a new tighter 1 hour standard. And this particularly, when you read Wall Street reports, they're very interested in learning which companies and which plants may be caught in that web. And the modeling is underway, and there's a lot of uncertainty and I guess caution around what will happen there. So that's something to look to as far as EPA's solutions for that, and whether or not that will be brought into their Casper rule. As far as ozone, I mentioned that there's a tighter standard happening. The current standard that Casper was written to was 84 parts per billion to achieve. The 2008 standard is 75, and EPA is in the process of developing a new standard, which a recent court decision has required them to propose by December of 2014 and finalize by October of 2015. So under this current administration, plans are for them to propose a new ambient air quality standard that could be between 60 and 70 parts per billion. The Clean Air Scientific Advisory Board has recommended on the lower end of that, but the feasibility of achieving that standard may be called into question, and so we might see something towards more the upper end of the 60s. But either way, that's a very strict standard that will be difficult for the industry to achieve, or will be costly, and that's something that a lot of people have a lot of uncertainty about, and it's something, frankly, that I don't think anyone can really realistically predict what will happen. But that's something that's key to watch. And I'll show a draft or an image to show this. This is the 2008 standard. Again, Casper was written to the less stringent 1997 standard, but this is the 2008 standard, and you see regions that are in non-attainment. If you look at a potential 2015 standard, which will be proposed in December, final by October of 2015, we see large swaths of the country that will be called under this web. And so you look at the scale of reductions that might need to be achieved, and considering all the reductions that have and will continue to be made in the electric industry, you really scratch your head as to what can be achieved and at what cost. And I think that's the question that everyone's wrestling with. And that's the real, I think, bear in the room when you talk about what's next for SO2 and NOx. Again, this is on a long horizon. The NAAQS will be finalized. The new standard would be finalized in October of 15. This is potentially under a transport rule or Casper Phase 3. So we're talking about implementation over 2019 to 2021. So it's far out there, but it's something to look forward to in the industry. And seems as if every plant will have to have at least an SNCR, if not an SCR, and so you really scratch your head as to see what costs the industry will have to bear to achieve that standard. Again, I want to ground us in where we are a little bit. You see, since 2000, the industry has made a lot of achievements in SO2 and NOx reductions. CO2 down slightly, so progress being made there. All the while, electric generation has remained largely flat, and forecasts are for that trend to continue, or electric demand to decrease over time as energy efficiency takes hold. You see renewables and natural gas all growing significantly at the expense of coal. And the question is, can the coal fleet remain? And with these incremental new reductions, at what cost will we need to achieve them? And I'll flip through here just to show you where the Casper reductions were in relation to the CARE, the existing programs. And you see our emissions are at or below the cap of the existing cap. Phase 2 CARE, or Casper Phase 2, the 2014 rule would have required further reductions, but if you look out in the last couple of years, again with changes in the industry, it looks like for SO2 and the MATS implementation will be below what Casper was originally proposing. And aside from the 1 hour standard where local regions or plants might be affected, there doesn't appear to be a major problem to achieving an SO2 or PM 2.5 National Ambient Air Quality Standard. But if we look at seasonal and annual NOx, similar story, reductions are required from 2012 levels. Again, but this was written towards the 1997 standard, so the 2008 standard will require some incremental more reductions beyond that. But largely with trading, it seems like it's a feasible standard to achieve. All bets are off for the 2015 standard. So with that, I'll just like to end with some general points here. First is that, the policy climate remains uncertain. I wish I could stand here today and tell you which plants will need to install what technology or close, but we're in a state of flux now, and I think we'll remain in a state of flux considering litigation and legal challenges for years to come. So I don't think there will be any silver bullet solution. I think we're going to have to suffer through this period for time to come, and I guess we've been doing so for the last 10 plus years, so I guess there's nothing new there. MATS will achieve many of the, or all of the SO2 reductions that were foreseen as required, aside from some certain local issues with the 1 hour standard. And broadly speaking, the electric sector has contributed many reductions, has been responsible for achieving a lot of reductions cost effectively. And the question is, what's going to happen going forward? Are we going to revert back to more of a command and control strategy for rack requirements and requiring every combined combustion turbine to have SNCRs? Or will we allow more trading and allow some flexibility, understanding that different regions of the country will have different impacts and costs bearing on them? It's a tough call, and I think that's something to look forward to the EPA, whether or not they double down on trading systems or allow states to impose more command and control regulations to either close facilities or require state-of-the-art control technology. And then finally, I'd like to point our attention to the bear in the room, which is mobile sources, which in New Jersey contribute over 50% of the contribution to the ambient to the ozone requirement. In fact, in New Jersey, power generation in 2008 only contributed 4% of NOx emissions in the state. And yet we have regions that are still in non-attainment and will be in non-attainment with the new standards. And so when a sector that has invested heavily to reduce its emissions is only contributing 4% of the overall amount, you have to wonder to what end will we say enough has been achieved by the electric sector and look to other sectors such as transportation, mobile sources. And that's a key question. It's a tougher nut to crack, but I think there's real opportunity perhaps for the industry in looking at transportation as an opportunity. If we electrify the transportation or move towards more of that, you can see power generation increasing, and you look at power generation growing 5%. What we're talking about, coal retirements and the viability of these plants that are producing, that's a dramatically different story. So it could increase their profitability and viability, all the while helping to achieve our air quality goals. So I know that's maybe a little pie in the sky. It's a tough challenge, but in New Jersey, we're starting to engage regulators on the need to look at achieving reductions outside of the sector, understanding that we've made investments and we've achieved incrementally, as cost effectively what the emissions reductions we could have, but it's maybe time to start looking at other sources and categories to achieve the ambient air quality standards.